So I had to check my watch for the year again over the weekend, make sure we were still in 2025, because we kind of had one of these Joe Biden news cycles over the last 72 hours. That was quite rare, meaning it was a Joe Biden. You might be forgiven if you thought Biden was still president versus Trump, because it's rare for Donald Trump to ever get overshadowed, particularly when he's actually president. But for the last 72 hours, all things Joe Biden has very much overshadowed Donald Trump. Now, some of it is intentional by Trump, and I'm going to get into that. But let's unpack this Biden news cycle. Obviously, the most recent news being his office announcing that he has an aggressive form of prostate cancer. So obviously, it goes without saying that is not good news to hear. And there is nobody that knows how to fight and rebound from health challenges more than Joe Biden. I feel like he's been doing it off and on his whole life. The guy is tough. He's resilient, and I have no doubt he's going to make it through this and likely thrive after they make their decision on where to go with treatment. Obviously, that news came in the middle of what's been a pretty negative set of headlines for Joe Biden and for the Democratic Party as a whole, as you've had the book, Jake Tapper, Alex Thompson's book, about what happened inside the West Wing, what happened inside the Democratic Party that led to what was a disastrous summer, if you will, the disastrous last 18 months of the Biden presidency. Was it a cover-up? Was it not? I don't think there's any proof that it was a cover-up of anything other than it was either a lot of willful blindness by the staff, perhaps making themselves feel better because it was Donald Trump that was on the other side, and had it been anybody else, maybe they would have had clear set of eyes and thinking. But that book got supercharged over the weekend with the Trump administration's decision and the timing of that. And again, I'm going to get into that in a minute, to release the full audio recording. And this was a Justice Department decision. They did it. So it's Trump's Justice Department that did this. Just keep this in mind. And we're going to ask some questions in a few minutes about why did they choose this moment? Why are they choosing to do this? But we'll get into that in a minute. But let's not beat around the bush. The release of the Robert Hur recording has certainly, I think, put that entire episode in a different light. What Robert Hur wrote about his interview when he said that no jury would convict him, as that he was going to be that his memory of was a bit forgetful, but it would be something that a jury would forgive considering his age. Well, when that report came out, there was immediate denunciations, because remember when it came out, he was still running for re-election at the time when this report came out. So it was obviously something that they feared would only sort of bring back the news cycle, bring back the chatter that he shouldn't run for re-election, that the party should go in a different direction. So there was a very forceful pushback, attacks on her personally, accusations that he was somehow doing the bidding of the Trump campaign when he was doing it, just personal and vicious attacks by some people who are not journalists, but are considered members of the media. And I do make this distinction because I do think reporters and journalists were trying to do a story and we're trying to be honest about what the heck was going on with Biden in the White House. But there were certainly pundits and analysts and hosts of cable TV shows that were trying to protect their access to the president and use talking points that were hand delivered to them by Biden supporters and Biden defenders to attack Robert Hur. We'll see if those folks decide to apologize, decide to do a mea culpa on that, because clearly now when you listen to the recording, Hur was not an antagonist here. Hur was not trying. Doesn't seem like he was at all trying to lead the witness in some sort of negative territory, that he was willfully misinterpreting the conversation that he had and how the interview went. I think it's pretty clear that Hur was a professional during the whole time, behaved very professionally, and certainly was even empathetic at times when the president, who of course it turned out it was the president that brought up his son's death, not Robert Hur. So that recording has only, I think, taken, and certainly let's remember, the Trump Justice Department released the recording to one of the two authors of the book, to the news organization Axios, which of course employs one of the two authors of the book. So the Trump White House knew exactly what it was doing here. They saw an opportunity to take a news cycle that was growing and developing and really was more of a Washington news cycle about the Democratic Party, and essentially add an accelerant to it, right? The release of this recording, which is not in the book. Okay, this was not something that they were able to get for the book, but they giving it to the author only seemed to supercharge the attention, and it certainly now created a much bigger news cycle and has forced a lot of Democrats to have to answer for this, because at the end of the day, the Democratic Party did turn a blind eye, not just to Joe Biden, but they turned the blind eye to the voters. Ultimately, what they did is the voters were the ones that were telling poll after poll that they had more concerns about Joe Biden's age than they did Donald Trump's character. And it was poll after poll after poll that would show that. And it was amazing to me how often Democrats would dismiss those numbers and say, oh, no, once the public sees Joe Biden in action, that will go away. But Donald Trump's character is built in, and the issues and the fear of his presidency will kick in, and people will focus on that. Well, that didn't happen because Joe Biden wasn't able to reassure folks that he was able to do the job. The debate, obviously the infamous debate, ended up being the moment that only reinforced what the voters were already telling us. And that's what I think is the biggest problem the Democratic Party has right now in this moment in dealing with this Biden situation. Look, it does appear that Joe Biden is about to experience what Jimmy Carter experienced starting in 1981, which is the Democratic Party is going to do everything it can. Anybody that's currently active in the party is going to do everything they can to find a way to distance themselves from him in some form. Maybe they will say, well, I thought, you'll hear Richie Torres, who I'm interviewing today. He's one of the rising stars in the Democratic Party. He may be a candidate for New York governor, a primary challenger to the New York governor there, Kathy Hochul. He will admit that, hey, it turns out we were wrong. We should have had a deeper conversation about this, is essentially his message. But I want to read something Chris Murphy said on Meet the Press to my friend Kristen Welker. And he said this because I think this gets it to the heart of the challenge for the Democratic Party going forward, if they're going to ever convince voters to trust them. In retrospect, Chris Murphy says, you can't defend what the Democratic Party did because we are stuck with a madman, a corrupt president in the Oval Office, and we should have given ourselves a better chance to win. So what is he saying there? What he's saying is to voters, it's okay to blame the Democratic Party for Trump's election. That if the Democratic Party had behaved more responsibly, had the Democratic Party put the wishes of the voters ahead of the wishes of the establishment, they may have gone somewhere. They may be in a different place. Donald Trump may not be president. The Republican Party, if Donald Trump ends up a failed president and sets the democracy back decades and sets American exceptionalism back decades, not only will you have the Republican Party to blame because they've willfully gone down this road and they've looked the other way on character and they've looked the other way on sort of the historical nature of what he's trying to do here. But the Democratic Party did the same thing. They didn't put the interests of the country ahead of the interests of the party or the interests of themselves. And what really makes it, I think, even more damning for the Democrats and why this recovery is going to be so much harder, no matter how unpopular Donald Trump and the Republicans are in this moment, because it's a trust issue, right? There was this lack of being able to see, and the rhetoric was Donald Trump's an existential threat to the democracy. Well, if you believe that, then you had to make sure you were doing everything you can as a party to put that front and center, that issue would be front and center. So if you had a sitting president that wasn't up to the challenge, then he needed to be primaried, or he needed to be convinced not to run again, and it should have happened a heck of a lot sooner. The party never seemed to take the Trump threat as seriously as the rhetoric they would utter, because their actions didn't back up the rhetoric. How do we know that? Just look at how they handled the Biden situation in the last 2 years of the Biden presidency. So the question is, how many people in the Democratic Party are going to be tainted with this? So let me go back. I want to go back to the experience of the last time that the Democrats had sort of this, they had sort of an era of defeat that called into question whether the Democratic Party was strong enough to lead in this country. The Democratic Party had got blown out in 1972 by George McGovern. They narrowly win the White House, even though they should have won it by a lot, but they narrowly win the White House in 1976, post-Watergate, essentially because Ford pardons Nixon, and that was an unforgivable sin. Carter gets blown out in 1980, Walter Mondale gets blown out in 1984, and Michael Dukakis gets blown out in 1988. So 4 landslides in 5 elections. And after that 1988 election, there were serious debates about what was the Democratic Party going to do with itself. There was books that were put out that said the permanent minority party, the Democratic Party is headed for permanent minority party status. And what happened? Somebody decided to pick a fight and take the Democratic Party in a whole new direction. And that somebody was Bill Clinton. And I've gone through this a few times before, so I'm not going to re-talk about this moment. But that was a cathartic moment for a party. And Bill Clinton confronted the establishment. Bill Clinton confronted the very basic issues that swing voters were saying they didn't trust, whether it was law and order issues, national security, or the economy, right? He came out and was and centered the party as being more pro-business, more pro-free trade, tough. Essentially, when he got elected president, he basically adopted half of the national defense policy that George H.W. Bush had, kept Colin Powell, kept a bunch of holdovers at the time, and essentially preserved much of the status quo in the national security. And of course, he projected himself as much tougher on law and order, even famously leaving the campaign trail to oversee the use of the death penalty when he was governor of Arkansas late in the campaign, just to reinforce the message that he was a different type of Democrat. It was all about him making contrast that he wasn't Jimmy Carter, that he wasn't Michael Dukakis, and that he wasn't Walter Mondale. And the one thing, and he actually had to push back that he wasn't George McGovern. That was a little harder for him. Why? Because Bill and Hillary Clinton ran Texas for McGovern back in 1972. But still, you see my larger point. He had to not just run against the party, but contrast himself and put those previous Democratic leaders in a negative light. That's likely the situation the Democrats are in now, right? If you put the grouping of candidates together of Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris, we've had 3 elections and 2 of them lost. And the Joe Biden victory turned out to be probably more of an accident in hindsight than we all realize. I think that one of the fundamental problems Democrats, I think, have made, and why they may have chosen not to confront the Biden age issue when they should have, is I think they misinterpreted both what happened in 2020 and 2022. I think the Democrats mostly believe that their success in 20 and their better than expected showing in 22 was due to a rejection of Donald Trump and Trumpism. When it looks like, if you actually dig in and now sort of see how voters behaved in 24, now we can look back and realize, oh, in 20, this was simply about COVID. And had Donald Trump managed COVID better, he'd have won re-election. And oh, by the way, he almost won re-election anyway. And in 22, it was simply superior Democratic candidates running against terrible Republican nominees. And if there weren't those terrible Republican nominees, the 2022 midterms go differently. And perhaps it actually motivates the Democratic Party to say, hey, they've got to pivot from Joe Biden. Something is wrong here. This isn't working.